A good matchup in the SEC opener for Missouri. It's one the Tigers got to have, so let's talk about it right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And I do have some possible solutions to jump-starting Missouri basketball's offense, which definitely hit a bit of a skid against Auburn in their previous game. And frankly, I think the Tiger football team was fairly fortunate that at least one of its guys returned for the 2025 season. But you know what? Let's start by talking about tonight's ball game against LSU for the Mizzou basketball team. I got to say, overall, I'm feeling pretty good about this matchup and this spot for Missouri. And first of all, it would just be nice to get off of this SEC losing streak, huh? Obviously, the Tigers ended a long losing streak earlier this season, beat Kansas, so it had some other good performances as well. Doesn't really feel like we're still on an SEC losing streak, and yet we are after losing to Auburn, obviously. So here's the thing with LSU. They've had a tough start to the season on a lot of different levels. They were the lone SEC team to lose a home game this past weekend in the SEC openers. Also, they've had injuries. They've had guys leave the teams for mental health type of reasons and all that kind of stuff. And yet LSU still sitting there as a solidly top 75 type of club here, and Missouri favored to win by just a handful of points or so if you look at the projection. So even though this is an absolute must-win game for Missouri, well, I'm sure LSU feels exactly the same way. So hopefully the home court will be a difference for Missouri. But as to this specific matchup, I talked with Zach Blackerby from Locked On Auburn last week about how Missouri had to junk up the game, create chaos, create turnovers more specifically. Well, I think if the Tigers can junk it up, it could be a long night for the Bayou Bengals. It really can, because LSU really does seem to be vulnerable to pressure, statistically well below average in terms of turnover percentage. So like Missouri, by the way, LSU more of a fast break, paint type of scoring team than it is a shooting team. So that's another reason why I think this matchup is relatively favorable for Missouri. On the other side of the equation, though, I do think LSU can hurt Missouri on its offensive glass, and they also don't foul a lot. That should help the Bayou Bengals against Missouri for sure, because, well, the Tigers, when they don't get a lot of action at the free throw line, their half-court offense tends to bog down quite a bit, and obviously Missouri has been hurt grabbing defensive rebounds by the opposition hurting Missouri on its offensive glass. And obviously Missouri's travel issues coming back from Auburn were less than ideal on Sunday. In fact, the Tigers didn't end up getting into town until early Monday morning. But I have to say I'd be a lot more worried about the Tigers' travel issues if they had to travel again. In other words, if this were an LSU home game, if Missouri had to travel to Baton Rouge almost immediately after having gotten home late from Auburn, that would have been a really huge concern for me. But I trust by this point that Missouri is going to be relatively rested up, and the 8 p.m. start time probably doesn't hurt that particular variable either. As for LSU and their potential travel issues, well, according to Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou, he posted yesterday on his message board that LSU had safely arrived in Columbia at about 5 p.m. yesterday. So it sounds like the game as expected, should be going off without too many hitches here. By the way, one of LSU's best players on the team this year, a young man named Victorious Miller. My goodness, I have never yearned more to have a son, simply just to bestow that name upon a young man. So as I step back and really analyze this Missouri basketball team, by the way, I like this team. I really do in so many ways. And yet, as a guy who also follows the NBA fairly closely too, if I were looking at the Tigers, if the Tigers were an NBA team, let's say, well, I would think they were maybe 1 or 2 trades away from being a true contender. The Tigers really need probably one more shooter, I would say, preferably a stretch 4 or a stretch 5. In other words, a bigger player who can knock down a shot, because at this point, the Mark Mitchell three-pointers are basically off the table to me. I really can't handle another pick-and-pop look like we saw at the end of bragging rights, which I think horrified every Mizzou fan as it was happening. So the thing is, that starting lineup for Missouri, Mark Mitchell at the 4, Josh Gray at the 5, for modern basketball, quite simply, if you're going to have 2 big men who aren't threats from the outside, that's just really going to hurt your spacing and your ability to score at an efficient level. It just simply is. So, unfortunately, as I've said before, I think a lot of Missouri's problems are, at least with reaching what could be its absolute ceiling, and why I'm saying, hey, if this were an NBA team, I'd think they were a trade or 2 away, is as I've said many times, Missouri's best offensive lineup doesn't necessarily match up with its best defensive lineup. There is one possibility, though, that I would like to explore, and that's possibly playing Trent Pierce at the 4 spot. Is that potentially a solution? Because now all of a sudden you've got a guy at the 4 spot who's 6'10", so you're not completely losing rim protection, defense, and rebounding, but a guy who's obviously a better outside shooter than Mark Mitchell at this point. Now you're looking at, say, Anthony Robinson in there with Caleb Grill and Tamar Bates, Trent Pierce, and Josh Gray, even with Josh Gray in here and his lack of offense. Well, that becomes much less of a problem, I should say, with better spacing. And again, that's taking out Tony Perkins there too. I'm just making the point that, hey, maybe there's your best possible shooting lineup there. Now, obviously, you could potentially take Gray out there as well and go with an even more offensively focused lineup, say with Mark Mitchell at the 5 spot along with Trent Pierce at the 4. Now, obviously, your defense is going to take a hit there, but I bet that particular combination can really score. And also because not only because your three-point shooting is better, your spacing is better. Well, that spacing then allows Mark Mitchell and his ability to drive the basketball and handle the basketball, attack the rim with penetration. At his size, well, that's even harder for a 5-man to contain that type of dribble penetration. Now, again, I don't think this is a perfect solution, but if there is one that could maybe juice the Missouri offense without completely destroying its defense, I think playing Trent Pierce at the 4 spot is something that Missouri should definitely explore. And I do want to talk some football, of course, on this episode too. And following those significant freshmen on the Missouri roster, Williams Nwaneri, Jaylen Brown, Kejuan Lacey, Courtney Crutchfield, those 4 guys in particular deciding to transfer from Missouri all within a very short period of time, had a lot of Missouri fans panicking. Some even saying that, hey, something stinks within the program. Well, I'll be honest, I think we can take that off the table at this point, and I'll tell you why coming up here in just a second. But first, yes, it is game time. And attending the new college football playoff games Boy, imagine that. What an incredible experience that would be. Well, I remember the excitement of attending my first college football game, my first major league game. And I got to tell you, as great as the TV experience is, I'm more drawn to live games each and every year. And here's the beautiful part. Gametime will get you there easier than ever with a new feature called Gametime Picks that will filter out all the fluff, just give you the best deals on the best seats in the house. Recently, I used Gametime Picks for an event, and I'll just tell you, browsing through the deals was such a breeze. I found a great value for all kinds of seats in the venue. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So by my loose math, I'm going to say at this point, the score in the transfer portal, Missouri is winning 14-5. And here's what I mean by that. Missouri has 14 guys coming in through the transfer portal, including, of course, quarterback Bo Pribula from Penn State, running back Amon Hardy, wide receiver Kevin Coleman, among many, many others, of course. All 14 of those guys, in my opinion, are at the very least expected to compete for a starting job next season. Whereas Missouri has lost 11 guys so far out going into the portal, whereas I would say really only about 5 of those guys I would have expected to compete for a starting job next season. I'm going to say Williams Nwaneri, Kejuan Lacey, Courtney Crutchfield, Jalen Brown, and also the cornerback Jaron Sensabaugh, who recently ended up at North Carolina State. Those are really the only 5 guys that I think would have been likely to compete for a starting job next season. Obviously, not all of those guys would have been starters, and not all 14 of the incoming transfers are going to be starters more than likely either. But again, 14-5. If that's not a net victory for Missouri, I'm not sure what is. And by the way, those 5 guys are all, for the most part, going to be sophomores, true sophomores this coming season, whereas, again, for the most part, you're talking about a lot of juniors and seniors. In Ahmad Hardy's case, a freshman, but yes, a freshman who was real proven production, well over 1,000 yards rushing, versus, again, as Eli Drinkwitz has said over and over again, or I guess he said it once, and I've been saying it over and over again, to be fair, production over potential. Well, that's basically what Ahmad Hardy is versus Kejuan Lacey at running back, for example. Kejuan Lacey was the higher-ranked high school prospect, without a doubt, and I thought Lacey showed some real explosion and potential for Missouri last season. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I wanted Lacey to leave whatsoever. But I think it's a good example of actually Missouri is bringing in more proven production with Hardy, and that's just a 1-for-1 trade. Again, it's 14-5 by my loose math of guys who are going to be potential starters versus the ones you lost. That's a net victory of 9 guys. That is significant if you think about it. What, you got 22 guys on both sides of the ball. You're 2 deep, so that's 44 guys plus a few on special teams, that type of thing. 9 guys, that's a significant net addition to your roster. So this idea that, something stinks, something is wrong in the program. I even had some commenters accusing me of being a Pollyanna a couple weeks ago, Mr. Pie in the Sky on this particular topic. Well, I think at the end of the day, hey, the portal isn't completely finished yet, but the lion's share, I'd say 75% or more of the movement has probably been done at this point. I think it's safe to say that Missouri, once again, is going to be a net winner in this portal process, and I don't know how you can hope for much more than that. Once again, as I said yesterday, the idea that Missouri is just going to rebuild in 2025, All I know is Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz, the NIL infrastructure, it's going for it in 2025. They're expecting to compete once again. How well that works, that's another question. But it's certainly not going to be for a lack of effort on Missouri's part. And of course, it's a victory anytime you have NFL caliber players return to your roster. Now, Luther Burden III was long expected to leave Missouri, but Armand Membou, that was much more of a, well, we'll see what happens. And unfortunately, I guess for Missouri's 2025 prospects, Membou decided to declare for the NFL draft. Now, I say, again, from Missouri's perspective, hey, from his perspective, good luck. I hope he crushes it in the NFL, of course. But I was just talking about net victories in the portal. Well, you could add one more there, in my opinion, too. I don't know exactly what Dalen Carnell's NFL prospects look like, certainly for this season or even next. But, man, when I watch that guy play and when I watch NFL football each and every Sunday, he sure seems like a pro to me. I think Missouri's really fortunate to have him back this coming season, a guy who is a former four-star corner coming out of high school, has now molded himself into a hybrid safety that looks like a linebacker at times, but can also definitely cover certainly running backs and tight ends, but also slot receivers as well. Carnell, to me, is the type of versatile player at the strong safety linebacker type of position that has basically become all one and the same at a certain point. You've got guys like Nick Bolton, who are your prototypical middle linebackers who stuff the run and lead the defense, direct the defense almost as the quarterback on that side of the ball. But really when it comes to your second linebacker, your weak side linebackers, your strong safeties, I mean, more and more those guys are becoming the same type of player. Look at J.C. Carlisle, by the way. He was a safety for Missouri. He's basically playing linebacker, is at least listed as a linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts now. So, again, to my point, these positions are becoming so much more malleable because, quite simply, you got to cover the pass in the modern game. You still got to be able to stop the run, too. But the priority is nobody wants to have a linebacker wearing number 45, a run-stuffing type linebacker running 20 yards down the field trying to cover Luther Burden III in the slot. It's just not going to work in modern football, which is why guys like Carnell are so valuable at the next level and, of course, in college football as well. So, again, I have no idea. I really don't. I've heard nothing about Dalen Carnell from an NFL scouting perspective, but he sure looks like a pro to me. And with demolition, if not construction, certainly well underway over on the north end zone concourse over at Faurot Field, I really hope there's one aspect of this project that Missouri didn't skimp on. For $250 million, I think there's a relatively modest sum that could really help the game day experience in a couple years at Faurot Field. So I want to talk about that. But first, FanDuel. Ah, yes. From big upsets to game-winning drives. Yes, the NFL playoffs are almost here, and it's better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose, the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. And I'll tell you this, even though the line is creeping up, Ohio State -5.5 over Texas in that semifinal game on Friday, I got to tell you, I still kind of favor the Buckeyes. I just don't see the Longhorns taking this one. Maybe that's recency bias and you want to go against me. Well, if you do, visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. If you remember the 2018 season at Faurot Field, you'll remember Well, the construction site happening in the south end zone, just flip it in 2025, and that should be what Memorial Stadium looks like this season. But the payoff, well, should be well worth it. I think the south end zone, certainly a beautiful complex. I enjoy sitting over there. Thumbs up on the bathrooms, all that kind of good stuff. No troughs for us people in the south end zone. But there is one thing that I would like to see. This is actually, well, I brought up this topic. Gosh, I've been talking about this for multiple seasons now. Just the sound design, quite honestly, at Memorial Stadium leaves a lot to be desired. At times, it's just deafening, to be honest with you. So here's the thing. A long time ago, I proposed, hey, obviously all of the sound is coming from one source. It's coming from the north end zone. Well, my first, frankly, ignorant suggestion was, hey, get some speakers in the south end zone too. Well, as someone correctly pointed out to me, no, those are way too far apart, and that'll just create an echo problem and would just be the worst sound design possible. Hey, fair point. But again, as this person pointed out, there is a potential solution there, and I saw it actually when I traveled to Columbia, South Carolina. In fact, if you look at Mizzou Arena, if you go to the game tonight, you ever go to a game, look at the speakers in Mizzou Arena. You'll basically see a whole bunch of black speakers stacked on top of each other, spaced out throughout the center of the arena. Well, at South Carolina, at their football stadium, they had a similar setup, except they're positioned throughout the outside of the football stadium. Well, the inside, but you know what I'm saying. Basically, underneath the concourses, that type of thing, the overhangs. Basically, there's a set of speakers every, let's say 20 or 30 yards or so. So instead of it all coming from one source, it's coming from multiple sources. Those of you who have like a Sonos type setup in your house, well, frankly, that made it a much better sound experience. And it was about as raucous and club-like of an atmosphere, all the music and DJ action that Missouri likes to pump in at their games these days, just like everybody else in the SEC and throughout college football and basketball does these days. Well, it's a lot better of experience when you're not just being pounded with music that is occasionally just horrible sound design. Basically, distortion is the word I was searching for there. You don't want distorted sound. You don't want music that is unpleasant to listen to, but you do want an atmosphere. And to me, that's what South Carolina did a great job of creating. And according to Google Gemini, by the way, Google's AI, this is the best source I had here, folks. I was like, how much did this actually cost South Carolina? A few years ago, they upgraded their sound system. The one that I experienced this season was about $11 million, according to Google Gemini. So we're talking a few percentage points of the $250 million budget here. To me, if we're going for the best live fan experience possible, if we're going to be playing that much music, it does matter the experience of the sound and the quality of said music. Am I overanalyzing this? I really don't think that I am. To me, $11 million, if it was worth it to South Carolina, it seems like that's a drop in the bucket compared to the north end zone, the costs overall. I think if South Carolina can afford that, I think Missouri can as well. It will increase not only the enjoyment of the experience for all your fans in the stadium, I actually think it'll increase the atmosphere and your home field advantage as well. Sounds like a win-win to me. And finally, on my previous episode, I was talking about a hypothetical example of, well, where is college eligibility going? And ultimately, my conclusion was that, hey, I think 5 years, I think as soon as next season that's happening. I think the red shirt is going to go by the wayside. And basically everybody's going to have 5 years to play 5 years instead of 5 years to play 4 years under the previous system. I really think that we've taken small steps toward that over the last few seasons. I think that's ultimately where this is heading. And one listener, I was kind of playing off him. He said, well, I guess you could just do 2 bachelor's degrees for 8 years and just remain eligible that way. Well, E.P. Healy here, a commenter, was not happy with this discussion whatsoever. He says, clearly you and at least one follower have no clue what it takes to get a bachelor's degree. Well, let me stop you right there, EP. I do have a bachelor's degree, so I may know something about what it takes. In fact, I got a bachelor's degree from the University of Missouri Journalism School. Perhaps you've heard of it. He continues and says he got 2 bachelor's degrees in 4 years, spread over 8 thanks to USAF. I'm sorry, spread over 8? Wasn't that what I was just talking about? Anywho, he says it only took a few credits for the second bachelor's because of all the electives required. In 8 years, you should be able to get a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, and still be, he misspelled B, by the way, looking for more. Hell, some could become a full-fledged doctor, including residency, in 8 years. Oh boy, I just love when people completely misunderstand what I'm talking about. Hey, EP, let me slow down for you and make this as simple as I can, because I don't think anybody other than you is confused here. We were talking about college eligibility. I was not playing amateur college student guidance counselor. I wasn't giving anybody advice on how to most efficiently complete their degrees. You do know that there are guys famously there was a tight end, I believe, for the University of Miami this past season who had played 9 years of college football. Well, somehow or another, he remained eligible. He completed his minimum college eligibility requirements in all of those seasons. Does he have 2 bachelor's degrees? I don't know. By your math, he should have like 28 in that amount of time, perhaps. I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. This is a football show. I'm talking about minimum eligibility requirements. Please try to keep up here, number one. And number two, could you try to not be so rude, Mr. E.P. Healy? I'm a member of this community just like you are. And frankly, if you had come at me with, clearly you have no clue, that's the first thing you ever said to me, if we ever met in person, I'd probably be real tempted to knock you off your bar stool. Let's put it that way. That's about as nicely as I can put it. So, EP, go ahead and jam that thought where the sun don't shine. Hey, what can I say? I had that one built up a little bit. I get a little tired of the rude commenters on occasion, but thankfully, for the most part, like 99% of you are awesome. But it's the 1%ers, they're the ones that ruin it for us all the time. Am I right? But hey, regardless, thanks for watching and listening to this episode of Locked On Mizzou. Love you guys so much. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And of course, for your second listen, check out Locked On SEC on YouTube, wherever you get audio podcasts as well. So until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.